So aloha everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar on the impacts of COVID-19 on small businesses with contracts. We are very lucky today to have the Business Law Corney's Kimmy Ide Foster, Greg Kim, and Catherine Tashner joining us today. And after today's presentation, we will be hosting a short Q&A session, so please feel free to stay on if you have any questions to ask our attorneys. Now I'd like to introduce you to our team. I am Malin Zambrano, the program coordinator here at Patsy T. Mink Center for Business and Leadership. And we have Brittany Montiliano, our program manager here. If you run into any technical difficulties during today's webinar, feel free to email me at mzambrano@ywcaoahu.org. And I will also be leaving my information in the chat. And also, before we get into it, I would like to mention to you all that today's webinar will be recorded. So please keep a lookout for today's webinar recording through a link by the end of the week. Now I would like to introduce you to today's moderator. We have Catherine Tashner. She is the co-founder of the Business Law Corps and partner of McCorriston, Miller, Mackay, McKinnon, LLP. Kat?
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. I am very excited to introduce our speakers. Our first speaker is Kimmy Ide Foster. She is an attorney at Chun Kerr and concentrates her practice in the areas of real estate, commercial finance, and general business transactions. Kimmy is a super strong advocate for her clients and for her community and was recently acknowledged by Pacific Business News as a 2020 Women Who Mean Business honoree. Kimmy is the current president of Hawaii Women Lawyers and also serves as a member of the Iolani Alumni Association Board of Directors. Our second presenter is Greg Kim, who has over 30 years of experience as a corporate and securities attorney. Greg is the founder of Vantage Counsel LLC, which he launched in 2004 and restated in 2019. Vantage Counsel is one of the first virtual law firms in the entire US. Greg is also super committed to serving the community. He is the co-founder of the Business Law Corps, which I'll share a little bit more information about in a second. And he's also a founding member of HighBeam, an accelerator program for emerging technology companies. And he served as the founding director of the Entrepreneurs Foundation of Hawaii. So two really, really awesome speakers, two of my favorite people, even though I don't always tell them that. So before we launch into today's seminar, I just wanted to share a little bit about the Business Law Corps. Greg and I co-founded it back in 2011, and we are a nonprofit organization that provides free legal services to small businesses and entrepreneurs. We do one-on-one legal counseling, 30-minute appointments every Wednesday. So if you have any questions after today's presentation, maybe you want to sign up for them, we do it at the Patsy Mink Center and also at the Entrepreneur Sandbox. We also do one-on-one, we provide direct legal services, and we do seminars like this. So that's the Business Law Corps in a nutshell, and I'm going to turn it over to our speakers now.
Hey, thanks, Kat. I really appreciate that intro. You're right. You don't tell me often enough that I'm one of your favorite people. And Greg probably doesn't hear it often enough either.
That's the first time I've heard that, yeah.
Ever. Okay, guys, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Let me know if you guys can see it in a second.
Well, while you're doing that, if you're online here, could you maybe just indicate in the chat box what kind of business you have or plan to have, just so we can try to gauge our comments to, you know, what you're trying to do. So
yeah, that would be great, actually. Thank you, guys.
And if you have any questions as we go throughout, feel free to drop them in the chat box. I'll do my best to kind of moderate them. Kimmy and Greg, do you want me to ask questions in the middle, or you want to wait to the end?
Oh, you mean the questions that come through the chat?
Yeah, if someone has a question in the chat, if it's relevant, maybe I'll bring it up. And then if not, maybe I'll keep it to the end.
Okay. Yeah, as we go.
I'm fine with that, because I think Greg and I were planning on leaving some time at the end anyway, so.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get started if that's okay with you guys. Okay. Oh, it worked. I'm always pleasantly surprised when I get things right on Zoom meetings. Like Kat says, my name is Kimmy Ide Foster. I am an attorney with the law firm Chun Kerr. This is a little bit out of our box because we tend to do a lot more kind of the big guy, the landlord, the whatnot. But I think that that might be helpful for some of you talking, because I can tell you what we're thinking And I can tell you what we're looking to see from some people. So the first thing you want to think about is, I mean, COVID has been, it's ridiculous. I don't know how many times I've seen the phrase in the email, an unprecedented situation, a time like we've never seen before. And the general response to that is just panic. And I mean, there was kind of the initial onset of COVID where the sky was falling and everyone was freaking out, and what are we going to do about this? But we were just talking to Maylin before that really that was only 3 months ago. So for some people, the sky is still kind of falling. You're still kind of in this survival mode. And like, I know it feels like everything is going wrong, but you really need to take a second and think about, what is my most pressing concern right now? Is it that I have a loan due? Is it that I have rent due? Is it suppliers that I can't meet? Is it customers that I can't meet? Is it employees that I'm trying to keep on payroll? I know a lot of you're all small businesses, and so employees may not be a big thing, but a lot of you probably have at least, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Is it a long-term or short-term issue? All of those kinds of things. And so really just drill down. It helps if you write it out. The best clients that come to us are kind of with a list of these are the things I'm really concerned about. I need your help in identifying others, but this is what's keeping me up at night. And we understand that, it's your business, it's your hopes and dreams. These are the things that are going to stress you out. This is a personal favorite of mine because you would be shocked at how many big professionals do absolutely nothing. And I understand it. I understand the tendency to stick your head in the sand like an ostrich. Trust me, I'm kind of like that when taxes come around, because I'm like, oh, I just don't want to do this. I don't want to deal with it. But a lot of people, I think, overestimate what they can do in the long term and underestimate what they can do in the short term. And so what will happen if you do nothing is probably worst case scenario. Landlords, banks, there is a pot and there is a certain amount of sympathy, and there is kind of an understanding. I mean, it's trite at this point, but it's an unprecedented situation. It's weird. Things are going crazy. But if you are the first tenant to come talk to me, or the first, borrower to come talk to me, versus the borrower or tenant that waited 2 months to say, hey, I think I have a problem, it's worse. It's human nature. You're kind of exhausting your options already. There's only so much that people can do. So I know the tendency sometimes is I think I can ride this out. What if I just don't do anything? Don't do that. That's bad. That's very, very bad. Early and often is the better way to go through this. And I think Greg will probably touch on this a little bit more, but identifying problems and solutions. And the third big key thing that I want you guys to take away is, should I get a professional involved? And when should you get a professional involved? That's a lawyer, a CPA, talk to your lender. And I'm not just saying this because it's my business, but the answer is yes. The answer is yes, and often. You are good at what you do. You are good at making bikinis. You are good at making sunglasses. You are good at selling honey. You are good at all of those things. But it's like Kat and I were talking this morning. It's you don't diagnose yourself going to the doctor. You don't walk in and say, hey doc, I've got COVID. What do I do? You go in, hey, I've got these symptoms. I don't know what's going on. I need some help. That's our point. We bring things around. A lot of times, I know it's hard when you spend the money up front, but if you spend the money to get a professional involved up front, it will pay off so much more in the back end. We're there to help you. We're there to help you prioritize. And a lot of times, things that can feel like the sky is falling, we have a solution for it. We've seen it before, and we're going to walk you through it. It also just helps tremendously to have someone else to talk to and be like, can you take care of this? I'm paying you. Can you handle this? And while that might stress, Kat and I out tremendously at some point, that's our job. That's the point of hiring a professional. So you're also going to want to do kind of a priority thing. You've probably seen stakeholder maps before. This is a little bit of a modified one. It's not really in terms of priority, but it's maybe more an urgency. So I'm sure you all have small businesses, so you understand a stakeholder is someone who has an interest in the business. For me, and this is just because I've seen a lot of friends with small businesses kind of going through some rough times, I think your employees are going to be one of your first big ones. Little bit of a horror story with one of my friends in that it's a family-owned company. He worked for a family-owned company. The accountants messed up the books. It was a complete mistake, and thought they were going to be able to pay them through the end of April. and there was only enough on payroll for like the first week of March. And they're a tour company, like that got shut down immediately. So that was heartbreaking. I mean, luckily my friend had some savings, but you've got people in there with families, you've got people in there that like, this is their only source of income. So make sure your books are in order, you know, kind of prioritize and be like, is this something we can write out, and talk to your employees about it, keep them apprised of things. I know that sometimes we tend to play things close to the chest. That's especially true for restaurants and food service industries. There's a little bit of a cultural thing in there, and that sometimes when you tell people, they'll either quit right away or unfortunately start stealing. But in situations like this, the more you can keep everyone informed and tell them what's going on, the better. It also creates, that we have found, a sense of, oh, this is our problem. This is not just your problem. Your landlord. I represent a lot of landlords. Talk to your landlord and talk to them early and often. Landlords are not, well, with some exceptions, landlords for the most part are not out to get you. They need your business and they need that space filled. And this is something that Greg, Kat, and I have talked about a lot of times, is that most landlords, if they are practical, understand that getting something of something is better than all of nothing. Real quickly, you guys probably know this at this point, but there was kind of a lot of confusion at the beginning of COVID, the difference between abatement and deferment. So they both have to do with rent. An abatement of rent means it's just forgiven. You're not off the hook to pay rent, say from March to July. A deferment of rent is, you're not paying rent from March to July, but you're going to be responsible for paying it later on. There's a lot of different ways that you can defer your rent. I've seen it in a lump sum, which to me makes no sense. Like if you couldn't make your rent March to July, you're not going to make double rent payments later on. The more practical thing to do is, if you talk to your landlord, is say like, hey, can I amortize this? Can I spread this out? We have had some clients who have extended the terms of tenants' leases just so that they can, you know, pay a nominal amount each time. And most of the time, landlords are more than willing to work it out with you. We don't want the spaces sitting empty. It's very hard to relet, especially in a climate like this. But the earlier you come to them, the more willing they are to work out a solution. It's the same thing with, you know, pretty much anyone else. Your creditors, this is your banks. If you started up a small business, there is a very good chance that you have a loan. And I think, and I don't own a small business, but to me, I think that's one of the scariest parts is, oh my God, what's going to happen? Are you going to foreclose on my assets? Am I going to lose everything? Am I set up properly? Like, am I an LLC or proprietorship? Like, what happens in the worst case scenario? And this is kind of like your landlord. The best thing you can do is talk to your bank, because banks don't generally want to foreclose on you either. If they invested in you and they made a loan to you, it's because they see something and they think that you can do some good. And so their first option, in pretty much every bank I've ever worked with, is let's do a workout. We have a lot of loans on the books right now with a lot of the bigger banks, ASB, Banco, First Hawaiian Bank. And I would say 90% of them right now are in some phase of a workout. There's really nothing you can do. Like if the income is coming in, you can't pay your loan. You just can't. But the bank also recognizes that, well, what am I going to do? Foreclose on everyone under the sun? Like, that's not practical. Some of you might have investors. Investors are a little bit of a weird group in that investors recognize there is an inherent risk to what they're doing. I'm not saying that that's going to make them super thrilled to hear that they aren't getting any return on their investment. But in terms of kind of the priority that we've talked about already, I would put this one somewhere near the middle. Keep them informed as much as you can. Tell them what's going on. Do not hide the ball. Again, I understand the tendency, and we have had clients that have wanted to be like, well, I want to make sure that it's going to fail before I tell them we failed. And I'm like, no. Like, we need to start easing them into this. Like, let's kind of do a couple hypotheticals and see what's going on. It comes down to communication, and it comes down to how you share your message. Your partners. There is a good chance that you started your small business with somebody else, whether it's another member in an LLC, a partner in a partnership, you know, you and your best friend. It's like you and your best friend having a lemonade stand. There's probably more than one of you. From our point of view, when you're trying to figure out what happens, if you're facing catastrophe, if you don't have any income, is have a cohesive way forward. meet between the two of you, three of you, four of you, and either figure out who's going to speak for the group or figure out, okay, this is what we all want to do. It's really, really, really difficult to get a business out of kind of the quicksand if you've got 7 different voices talking at one time. One of the things that we see this a lot, and this is not knocking on it at all, like I sit on a bunch of nonprofits, I work with a lot of nonprofits, but nonprofits have a tendency to err towards this because it's kind of that everyone gets a vote, which is wonderful. I think that private business could learn a lot from it, but it also tends to create this sense of like, you don't have a direction. And if the sky is falling, you need to pick a direction and you need to commit to it and say, okay, we're gonna go. And a lot of times when you do retain a professional, they will require you guys to kind of pick like one person to talk to. So talk amongst yourselves and figure out what it is we want to do. And the last one, to me, this is kind of the saddest when you're in a tough position, especially in times of like COVID, is how do you message it to the community? You know, how do you tell the community like, hey, I know you guys really believe in me, and like, I was super excited. Maylin was telling me about this before. I just opened up my new storefront and, you know, a hurricane's coming, COVID's on the way, and I don't know if I'm going to make it. So to the extent you can kind of manage that, and I think that social media has actually been really, really good for that. It's gotten the word out about a lot of small businesses. It's gotten out about like, hey man, things aren't looking good. This is what's going on. Because it's very jarring, I think, for a lot of us, where we're walking by a storefront one day and you walk by it the next day and it's gone. And you know, for you, maybe you're cutting your losses and whatnot, but if you ever want to do something again in kind of the same field, or if you want to start another business, like to the extent you can control your messaging, do what you can. You know, people understand this is weird. Greg will touch a little bit more on this later. I don't know if you have anything to say on this right now, Greg, but kind of understanding like what's your end game. So we talked a little bit about at the very beginning of this is your long-term versus your short-term. Your short-term is kind of like, okay, how am I going to get through to next week? How am I going to pay the rent? How am I going to make payroll? How am I going to pay down the loan? Your long-term is like, okay, I've got a 5 to 10 year lease. Do I want to be here? Is this going to work out? You know, I have investment options that are supposed to mature at the end of 10 years. Is that really realistic? Like I said before, I think a lot of people, we tend to overestimate what we can do in the long term and we underestimate what we can do in the short term. I'm guilty of this. I'm always like, oh, that's not due until next week. I'll start it next week, Wednesday. And then next week, Wednesday rolls around and there's 8,000 things on my desk. And I'm like, well, it wasn't a fire before this, but now it is. So sit down and try to figure out, you know, upfront versus back end issues. I know it can feel overwhelming. Proactivity versus damage control. This kind of goes to what I was mentioning before, in that be as proactive as you can. Kat and I were just talking about that this morning, in that one of the most frustrating things for if you're engaging a professional is when you come to us and the problem is already like that horse is out of the gate. It's kind of like when someone comes to us with a contract that's already signed and says, oh, can you take a look at this? And you're like, yeah, but the ideal time to have done this would have been before you signed it. So I can walk you through it and I can tell you what's going on. And I understand that you think like, you might think, I know this, I know what to do, I understand, but it never hurts to get an opinion on it. It never hurts to get an expert involved. And that way, at least we're kind of in front of the problem instead of trying to stop the hemorrhaging. Because there's definitely phases, right? Where there's like, okay, can I survive? What's my game plan? Versus if we come in at the back end, it's like, okay, how do I cut my losses? What's the least amount that we can cut out? You know, who do I need to let go? It's kind of a more sad analysis when you get to the damage control side, which kind of leads into the can and should I survive this? I understand that there is a tendency to want to make things work. I helped a good friend of mine. She had built out a yoga studio that was set to open in April. I mean, she put a ton of her own money in tenant improvements, and like, she was so excited about this, but it's a hot yoga studio. Like, that's not opening this year. That might not be opening next year. And initially, she came to talk to me about this, and she kind of had to talk her around where she's like, okay, well, how do I get the landlord to like keep me on for this year and I'll work it out next year? And I was like, I I hate to be the person raining on your parade, I really do, but I think we need to think about business options here. Like, is this something that you should hang on to? Or is this something that you should cut your losses and maybe restart later on? And it can be heartbreaking. I understand that. But you know, you kind of have to take a step back and be like, okay, what is the best solution for all of us involved and for the long term? Which kind of goes to, can I get out of this contract? So the first thing that you should do, in whatever kind of contract you have, a sale, purchase and sale, supplier contract, a lease, pretty much anything. I think people hear the word contract and they think it's kind of like a big legal document, but in essence, a contract is really any agreement between two parties to do anything. You make contracts all the time. So review the terms of your agreement. A lot of them are going to have kind of standard boilerplate language. Once in a blue moon, we'll see what we call a hell or high water clause, especially in loan documents. And it's exactly what it sounds like. Come hell or high water, you are responsible for this. There's no backing out of this. That said, if you talk to your lender, you talk to your landlord, there's usually a little more wiggle room depending on who you are and what your tenant situation is. But at least when you review the terms of your agreement, that way when you go talk to your landlord or you go talk to your supplier or you go talk to your customers, you know what it says. You have a basic understanding of what your rights and your responsibilities are. I can't tell you how many times people come to us and I'm like, okay, well, you know, on section 13, and they're like, oh, you know, I didn't really read past the summary. And I'm like, okay, first things first, you need to read this. Well, can't you read it for me? It's not the same thing. That's especially true with things like franchise agreements. We see a lot of those for small business owners. We helped a small business owner open a boba and tea shop in Kailua. Franchise agreement was like a phone book. That thing was huge. I mean, we helped her get through it, but she needs to understand what's going on in there. One of the most popular buzzwords, I think, of COVID has been force majeure. And I think, unfortunately, it doesn't apply quite as often as people think it does. So force majeure, if you're not familiar with it, it's kind of like when you think about like act of God, strikes, lockouts, things beyond your control. What force majeure can do, so the upside of force majeure is it can delay performance. For example, we had a client that was supposed to open kind of like a local grocery store, kind of mom and pop style shop that had a opening date under their lease of, I think, like March 31st, which you can't do it. You couldn't get people in there to do the build out. You couldn't get people in there to stock the shelves. And so we were kind of able to claim like, look, because of the delay, we will open when the orders are lifted. What force majeure typically cannot do is it almost never completely gets you out of your contract. It also almost never gets you out of your monetary obligations. So that right there, that little arrow that I just put in, that clause is in almost every force majeure clause I've ever seen. So force majeure can cause a delay, force majeure can excuse part of performance, but come hell or high water, you're paying us your rent. You're paying us your loan money. It sucks. I understand. I've seen clients on both sides of this, and sometimes it just seems incredibly impractical. Like we have a bunch of hotel clients that are like, we literally cannot pay rent because we don't have any operating income. And then you get into it with your landlord and you try to figure out a solution. But I think a lot of people were looking to force majeure, like, oh, get out of jail free card, like, boom, act of God, this is great. And it's not. It's not. It doesn't have the wide range effect that I think a lot of people think it does. On that note, in terms of act of God, I think one of the only successful act of God arguments I've seen come through our office was we had some clients who had investment property down on Big Island with the lava flows. That was weird. That was unprecedented, an act of God kind of thing. But to totally get you out of your contract, probably not. So you're wondering, okay, well then what does discharge my obligation? The four corners is kind of a legal way of saying the four corners of the document. It's exactly what it sounds like, but sometimes you kind of have to look beyond that. And this section is going to get a little bit technical. You don't need to understand all of it, but I do want at least you guys to be able to issue spot and understand and be like, oh, I've heard that term before, this might apply. So frustration of purpose. Frustration of purpose is a legal theory in that the purpose of the contract is no longer applies. the reason that parties enter into a contract. And both parties knew the principal purpose at the time the contract was made, and it no longer exists. So a good one for this is that we had a client a few years ago who contracted to buy and sell fireworks, literally months prior to the firework ban going into effect. This is before it got lifted again and sort of put in place. We eventually did manage to get them out of that contract, and we relied largely on frustration of purpose because the point of the contract was to enter into a commercial agreement for the purchase and sale of fireworks. And then the purpose went away through no fault of anybody to the party. So there's something there, frustration of purpose. Impossibility or impracticability, which I think is a word that only attorneys use, of performance is a very, very similar legal doctrine. The distinction between frustration of purpose and impossibility of performance is that impossibility concerns the actual duties specified in the contract, whereas the frustration of purpose has to do with the circumstances. So impossibility of performance would be like, let's say that, this is actually comes from a legal book of examples, is that let's say on June 1st, you have an Etsy shop that agrees to sell swimsuits that you designed, but they are made in overseas, let's say China, where most things get sewn anyways. Okay, great. June 15th, a port gets shut down for quarantine and you cannot ship anything. Like, no, nothing's coming out of there. Nothing's getting received, nothing's coming out of there. There is no commercially reasonable substitute. Like, you can't do anything about this. And you fail to deliver the swimsuits that you said you would to your people that are going to distribute it to various people. Your duty to deliver those swimsuits is discharged, and you're not liable for breach of contract because it was literally impossible for you to do something about it. Impossible and impracticable will kind of depend on the circumstances. Impracticable is just a fancy way of saying highly impractical. I'm actually not super sure why we add that phrase in there. But when courts look at it, they'll look at it in the totality of circumstances. Like, okay, could you have done something to mitigate this, or was this, this is gone. You can't do anything about this. The third theory that I have seen a lot of, which, to clarify, I'm sorry, let me back up. So both frustration of purpose and impossibility / impracticability of performance have been fairly successful in terms of contracts and COVID, because a lot of businesses depend on suppliers. They depend on being able to ship things in, especially in Hawaii. And like when the airlines were down, when you couldn't get anything really in and out other than shipping like via barge, it's impossible. Like, what do you want me to do here? A third theory that was thrown around a lot at the beginning of COVID that did not gain any traction is what we call legal taking. A legal taking is when the government takes something private for public use. Hawaii actually has a long history of legal taking claims. The Kaiser Marina, in that Kaiser built out this whole thing and the Army Corps of Engineers came in and was like, sweet, thanks for doing this, it's ours now. And Kaiser was like, hey, I don't think you can do that. And the Supreme Court said, yeah, you're right, you can't. So that's kind of the most basic sense of taking. At the very beginning of this, we saw a lot of clients or people opposite of our clients trying to raise that the government closures and shutdowns constituted a taking. But the problem is that for government action, it has to be reasonable, it has to be necessary, and for the welfare of the people. And you fail on all three of those tests. Shutdowns were mandatory. You had to do something. We didn't know what was going on. So I bring it up only because I think it got a lot of buzz, and I think that it's a very attractive argument. And I tried to float it at the very beginning because we were really SOL in a couple of contracts, but it doesn't have, there's just really no grounds for it. And the fourth one is going to be kind of your general public policy. This doesn't really have any roots in law per se, but every client and every tenant and every supplier is different. So for example, go back to my friend with the yoga studio. The landlord that she was renting from is a huge landlord around town, probably one of the biggest 3 property owners in the state. She is a yoga studio that is the size of a postage stamp. It is her own business. She's doing everything she can to keep it afloat. And initially they said, this is our flat deferment rate. You're getting the same deal as all the other tenants. She, because she's smart, said, you know what? I'm going to get a lawyer involved. I talked to somebody and explained my situation. And it took some pulling teeth and it took some prodding and whatnot. But finally, we ultimately made the argument like, do you guys really want to be the people that caused this girl to use her unemployment checks because she's also out of work to pay rent for a studio she's never going to get to see? If we ever have to take this to court, which God forbid we do you really want to be those people? And I kid you not, I think within 2 hours, I got an email back that was like, you know, we've reconsidered our position and we think that we are willing to terminate this. And I'm like, see, there you go. No one wants to be them. So there is a kind of like, there's an underlying, especially in Hawaii, I think for equitable results, you want to look at the big picture. COVID's not going to last forever. I hope not. And, you know, what works for one person might not work for the other, but there's no harm in at least trying to make your argument that this is why I'm different. This is why I deserve to be let out of this. Because there are some industries that are just, they're always going to struggle. Bars are about to close down again if Caldwell has his way. Like, I think that we have some like hair salons in here. Like, that's hard. That's tough, man. You know, not all industries are built equally to withstand COVID. So take into account what you've got and you go from there. And I think that might be my last one and turning it over to Greg. Oh, Greg, you're on mute. There you go.
Uh-oh. You're doing so well there. This is my dog, Honey. She's lying at my feet right now. So that's one of the benefits of COVID. But I've been working this way actually for 16 years. So it's nothing new for me as far as the work style. That was a great summary of the law and you know, the process. If I could just weigh in a few initial comments before I start my slides, and hearing no objections from Kat, I guess it's okay. Oh, by the way, you know, I really miss hot yoga, but you know, I hope it comes back.
Me too. I miss my yoga studio.
No, yoga and I don't mix. So anyways, but I do take tap dance. But just a few general comments. It's really treacherous now, and I think that's really uncomfortable for people. But I think just recognizing that it's treacherous kind of helps, because no matter what you do, you're going to have a problem. So, you know, my wife works at a school, and, you know, they've been working on reopening, and, you know, if they reopen, they have a problem. If they don't reopen, they have a problem. Usually in the world, you can avoid problems, right? And that's what lawyers help you do. So, and that's why it's really important to talk to a lawyer to help you navigate the rough waters, because you're going to have rough waters no matter what you do. And if you're out there on your own, DIY just doesn't quite cut it, you know, for that. Even if it's just coming to a counseling session for a half hour, you know, get some guidance. And I would say too, this is the time to act, because all hell is broken. And so if you wait a month or two, calm down, you might not get the same response from the other party, right? Right now, it's all the rules are different. It's a new norm, but a few months from now, after they've gotten, you know, 500 requests to amend and you're 501, they might tell you to get out, you know, forget it. So you don't want to wait partly for that reason as well, is because all the rules have changed. And so you want to benefit from that right now. And, you know, I think parties get loosened up to certain ideas. Like if Kimmy's clients have been interested in giving deferrals or abatements, maybe you can ride that momentum, versus if you wait a couple months from now, they might get tired of it, right? So don't wait for that reason, as well as what Kimmy said. And then finally, just as an overall comment, I think that this is a great time to restart a business. First of all, you might have no choice but to start a business, but that means that you're gonna have the creativity and innovation it takes to do a new business, because your back's against the wall. So I would say those are the best times to start businesses, and the greatest businesses in the world have come out of recessions. And so even though we're sad to have failed or to lose our jobs, in a way, you have to look at that as a real opportunity. And I would highly recommend starting a business that won't fold again. What does that mean? Well, don't just sell to Hawaii people. You know, if Hawaii is your market and we're sucking wind in Hawaii, guess what? Your market just went away. So that's why restaurants are going away, because they can't sell food and ship it by FedEx. So, or through the internet. So, you know, if I were a business owner, I would think about, gee, what can I do where my market is not just Hawaii? There's plenty of opportunities for those kinds of businesses. But getting back to the slides, just emphasize the force majeure and impossibility defenses. First of all, you know, those things aren't going to get you anywhere. It just gets you away from a problem. So it's not an offensive tool. So it's not going to get you someone to pay you. It's not going to get the other party to perform, because you might be on the other side. You might be the party that wants to enforce the contract. You might not be the party that's trying to get out of an obligation. So it's really just half the equation. So if you are potentially breaching and you want to avoid getting sued, then yeah, that could be helpful. But that, of course, doesn't make for a good business. And then on the force majeure, I would just add a few overall comments. Oftentimes in legal practice and business dealings, it doesn't really matter what a court can do, because you're not going to go to court. You know, if you have a small contract, I mean, it's not worth it for either side really to bring a lawsuit. So then the question is, well, why would you use these legal principles? Well, it's like ammunition, right? It gives you leverage on the other side. And if you make a strong enough argument, they might be more cooperative. Because, you know, there's always the off chance you will go to court and they don't want to lose. There's also a lot of different types of force majeure clauses. So Kimmy showed you one that was well drafted. Some of them aren't well drafted. You know, they might just say a party's not liable for breaching an obligation it could not perform, period. So what happens when that force majeure condition goes away? Are you supposed to perform after that? Her clause was very specific. A lot of clauses aren't specific. So there's a lot of different scenarios to consider. And that's another reason to have someone take a quick look at your force majeure clause. And finally, on that point, I would just say that now that we've had COVID, it is not impossible to anticipate COVID. So if you're doing new contracts now and you have just a general force clause and a spike hits a few months from now, I think there's a good argument it's not a force majeure anymore, because you knew that it was possible. And so if I were doing a contract today, I would put a COVID clause in there and negotiate something with the other party that says, if there's a spike, what happens, right? I mean, contracts are supposed to be a meeting of the minds. And so now that you know about COVID, you should try to have a meeting of the mind with other parties, whether they be landlords, tenants, contracting parties, et cetera. So any questions? I'm hearing crickets in the chat box. Anyway, of course, that's not unusual for any class that I teach. But moving on to my slides. So if I have a client come to me, then, you know, they're frantic, right? They're like, oh, this person's threatening to sue me. Oh, they're not performing. They're not paying me. They're just totally confused, I think, basically, but they're just talking about all the problems they're having. So what lawyers will do, and I think where our value is to calm you down and say, okay, well, what is it that is the problem? And I'll give you a hypothetical after this that goes into that. So I think Kimmy covered this a bit, is, you know, what are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to not perform something? Are you trying to get out of that obligation completely? Are you trying to force someone to do something? What is it you're trying to, what's the bottom line? And then, you know, look at your legal position like Kimmy had gone through. And then you really need to think about, why would the other party agree to anything you would ask for? Well, only if it's for their benefit, right? So you need to put yourself in the other party's shoes if you want to be effective as a lawyer or as a client, to say, how can we get them to yes? And so you can think of some arguments, like, let's say you're a tenant and you know, you're going to go under if they don't agree to defer or abate your rent. Why would the landlord agree to that? There's nothing in it for them. Well, maybe there is. I mean, if you think about it, it might take them 6 months to a year to find a replacement tenant. They're going to have to do improvements for that tenant. In the meantime, if you start paying them rent in 3 months, they're going to actually make more money, right? And so while you want to not want to be too threatening against people, it's you want to definitely present a story where your solution is good for them and is the best solution. And then when you get down to actually drafting the language or whatnot, you know, and this is more of a lawyering thing, but are you going to be aggressive and ask for the world, or are you going to just limit it to what you need, right? Let's say you want 2 months, but you're not sure that even in 2 months you can pay the rent. Well, are you going to ask for a year? You can ask for 6 months. I think it might be a better strategy to tell the landlord or the other party that, you know, I think I'm going to be okay in 3 months. Can we just do a 2-month deferral now? And then if I have a continuing problem, I'll let you know. And at that point, you know, we can reconstruct something. So, you know, I think it's best to be honest and transparent. And that way you have credibility and they'll trust you. Versus if you say, well, you know, I need 6 months, then you're going to have to prove to them, why do you need to save all that money? You know, what if you start up in 3 months and you're starting to make a lot of money? How come you shouldn't pay them rent, right? So maybe you need to come up with some hybrid clause there where the rent's re-triggered if you hit a certain revenue number, right? I mean, there's ways of dealing with that. And then, you know, looking at what are inadvertent consequences, right? Because whatever you negotiate now, for example, might appear in the next contract. And so you want to look ahead and act wisely and not say anything that could come back and hurt you. And I think that's where lawyers can kind of caution you there. Can we go to the next slide? So I think I touched on this basically, so we don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but, you know, go through these sequence of questions to ask yourself. And other than figuring out what you want to propose, you know, how are you going to approach the other party, right? In Hawaii, especially, it's all about people, you know, so you don't want to go in with guns blazing usually. So, you know, who's the best person to deal with the landlord or the other party of the contract? How are you going to approach them? You know, do you have any leverage? I use leverage in a soft way. You know, it's not like you're going to hold a gun to their head, but, you know, is there some accountability there? For example, are they in breach of certain things that you're willing to overlook? And again, there's a benefit for them, right? If you have such things to mention. And then what is the sequence, right? I mean, in strategy, we usually like to start soft, and then we're going to keep turning up the volume. And at the end of the, you know, try to keep turning on the pressure, right? So your first approach might be a call, then it might be a letter from you, then it might be a letter from the lawyer, then it might be something worse, right? So I think you want to come up with what is the sequence. And then move on to the next slide. I think this might be my last slide. Oh, okay, just real quick, because I want to get to my hyper real fast here before we run out of time. Find a lawyer, and these are just some possibilities, but I think, you know, if you're your own lawyer, you have a fool for a lawyer, right? I mean, I didn't make that up, but I heard that somewhere. So, you know, if you have money, then, well, family lawyer usually is the worst place to go because lawyers are not good at doing everything, believe it or not. I mean, I know you probably think that, you know, we're good at doing everything, but we're not good at doing very much. So we're good at our expertise. And so when you go to like your estate planning lawyer to do a contract thing, you know, they might take it, but then, you know, that might be a bad situation. You can hire out, you know, I think rates run from associates 150 to 300 an hour for partners and above. So that could get pretty expensive. So you want to scope that out with them if you go that route. The Hawaii Bar has a referral program if you don't have anyone that can refer you to a lawyer, which is the best way, but there's the number there. And then there's some pro bono legal services that you can, wow, I really had a lot of typos there. But anyways, that you can refer to the Business Law Corps. Of course, we have lawyers that have signed up to do pro bono. They might be kind of busy, but so if they're not available at the law school, we have a clinic that does pro bono work. So you can reach me to ask for an application for that. And going to my last slide, I think just quickly want to go through this hypothetical, if that's what it is. Oh, yeah, don't have to read this. I'll just tell you what happened here. So this is a recent situation. The client's name is Noname. And I'm just kidding. It's anonymous. So the guy came to me and he was like, hey, he has this event planning business. For weddings, it's for an aspect of the weddings. And he's going, yeah, we have this contract with the client. They were going to come to Hawaii, and they're calling me and they're threatening me to sue me. And, I don't know what to do. I'm trying to work with her. And then suddenly she turned on me. So, now she's threatening to sue me again. And so basically she hired his company to help at her wedding here. And obviously she can't come here. Right. And so, and he said, oh, I heard about force majeure. First time I heard about it was yesterday. What is that? And then, so here's the contract. So basically he's got this force majeure clause, which I think is pretty well drafted actually. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that if she can't come here and do the wedding because of quarantine and COVID restrictions, I feel that's a compelling argument. I don't know if I'd win in court, but I feel that we would be in a bad position if we tried to force her to take a plane, come here for 14 days, live in a hotel, and then do her wedding with the whole wedding party. I mean, I think the way I look at legal liability is that's unreasonable, and therefore you probably will lose. A court's going to try to find a way to get you because that's just not reasonable. And this guy's really reasonable. He's trying to work it out with her. And so he's like, well, just frantic, right? I said, well, what's the real issue here? What does she want, right? Going back to my slide, what does the other party want, right? So then I kind of immediately thought of, she probably wants her money back, right? I mean, so I said, did she put a deposit down? He goes, yes. And does she want it back? And he goes, I think so. I think that, because you have to think about what's driving the other side when you negotiate something. So, so I said, okay, well, let's look at the contract. And so he read it to me over the phone, and I'm like, well, it's kind of vague as to what happens in a force majeure. Like, at what point do you say that the contract's off, right? All his contract says is if the client cancels, then they don't get their money back. If he cancels, which he's not willing to do, then she gets her money back. So I said, under that case, it seems like, you can hold her money, but you have to be flexible on when she can do it, which she was totally being. So then she sent me the contract, and I read it real fast. And then it says, if you look at the third highlighted provision, it says, please note, if for any reason you wish to cancel, your deposit is unfortunately non-refundable regardless of cancellation situation. So I read that back to him, and it made him feel a lot better, because even though it doesn't mention, force majeure there as an acceptable reason, I would think that that's such a broad statement. It probably would be enforceable over the force majeure clause, because it does say regardless of the cancellation situation. So I don't know I think he was just lucky. And that's the other thing too, is I notice a lot of clients just get lucky on their contracts because they don't really know what's in them when they sign them. So, I mean, that's a good kind of cautionary tale for all of you, is to read it, and maybe if you can get someone to read it for you, that would be awesome, because they can probably anticipate more of these things than you can. So, but I think that's my last slide. So should we offer up some time here for Q&A?
Sure. So we have one question from Tiff. Hey, Tiff, what up? Tiff is asking about how to balance the concern of, reopening against the potential exposure by someone once they reopen. Any thoughts about that?
Do you want to do that for me, or?
Sure,
I
sure.
can say something too. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. The answer is there's no perfect answer. And as an attorney, it depends, which I hate hearing, but it's true. Like I said, every business is not built equally. There are more high-risk businesses that the risk may not be worth it. Bars, hot yoga studios, bar class, like actual bar dance classes. But the only thing I can say is, make sure you have your insurance in place, talk to your insurance companies, not that they're the easiest to work with. There's no perfect thing there. Greg.
Right. I agree with that. I would say, hey, Tiffany, Tiffany was in one of my law school classes and was a star student. So good to hear from you. So I would take a more aggressive stance. Well, I think as you practice for a long time, you tend to do that. But I think that I would say that no matter what you do, there's going to be risk to the people you're helping, like in a school, for example. School is worse probably because it's young people and some older teachers. But so I would say that, but there's also risk if you don't do it, because I assume these nonprofits are providing some sort of service they consider essential, whether it's helping homeless people, helping people with disabilities, whatever it may be. Are you going to sacrifice that for the sake of not having liability? For me personally, and I know this sounds weird coming from a lawyer, I would much rather incur personal liability and try to help someone than to avoid personal liability and just sit in my room. And that's kind of like how we practice in our law clinic. It'd be much easier for me not to do that legal work because you could get sued and I don't get paid for it. Or business law corps, we could just not get sued by sitting at home, not doing the work. Or even our volunteer service help is on the way. We do deliveries for Kapuna. We would be less liable if we didn't do it. But at some point you have to decide what is the more important thing to you. If you decide to do it, then of course you want to follow the current thinking on safety protocols, which is constantly evolving, so stay on top of that. So I would say this falls in the category of doing your best to keep people safe. And if you do that, you combine that with perhaps getting a release from people, clients and or employees. And by the way, the release probably won't work if you're being reckless, so it's not a cover-all kind of situation with any release. So if you do something recklessly or intentionally, of course, the release is going to be worth the paper it's written on. But having it is a good idea. And then, of course, you want to prepare it well. So you want to get someone to look at it if you can. And then, insurance can be helpful too. But I would just say that it's a weird time. Like I said before, it's a new normal. There's risk no matter what you do. So people have to sort of recast their own risk tolerance and risk management thinking on things, unless they just want to shut down, which I think if I were providing an essential service, I would try like heck to figure out how to do something, and that's where I think innovation comes into play because your back's against the wall. And I think we're seeing that in the community. So anyway, that was kind of long-winded, but is that any follow-up to that, Tiffany, or any other questions?
Well, we can. Oh, she says thanks. I have a couple questions. So it sounds like there's like a lot to look at. There's so many, like every contract's different. Every small business probably has something different to think about. For the ones that are kind of strapped for cash, maybe they're starting up, or they're busy on putting their money elsewhere for their small business. Kimmy, if we could go back to maybe the previous slide with some of the resources. Greg, you're one of the co-founders of the Business Law Corps. Could you give a little bit more background on what kinds of services they add? One question we received was, does the BLC offer contract review? Maybe this is a good time to expand on some of the resources that might be of interest to some of the webinar attendees.
Okay, if you qualify for help with Business Law Corps, then you're assigned to a lawyer in our system, and they're all the big law firms in town, highly competent lawyers who do your work for free. And so, but it's a well-defined project. It might be draft a particular kind of contract, and then once that's assigned and the lawyer takes it, that's it. But it's not a continuing engagement, so it's sort of case by case, ad hoc. I think one challenge we face is that lawyers are pretty busy, and I imagine they're either busy or distracted or both right now. And so it's not always easy to find someone to undertake a free legal project. And that's why I mentioned my law clinic, because I have a captive audience of law students that has to do the work. Well, they want to do the work. Well, that's what I tell myself. But I think most of them have signed up for the clinic because they want to learn business law. So they love actually doing the client work. And you get free legal work, and I supervise it. So it's the same work I would do. It just might take a little longer because they're learning on it. So that's one good option. And then the third thing, and Kat and I have talked about this a bit, is maybe Business Law Corps can offer some specific free services in the future. Like what, and we'd love to hear from your ideas, but one thing I was thinking of is to offer free pro bono legal services to anyone that needs to restart, to sort of help the community get through this COVID crisis. And especially if their business looks like one that is sustainable and could create jobs, then that would be a win for Business Law Corps. So we're constantly thinking about ways that we could help. And I personally, if someone's in dire straits, you know, I'm always happy to chip in and take a look at something, if you know, so people reach out to me all the time, actually personally. So that's an option.
I think one thing to note is that, you know, for attorney referrals, you know, same like, you know, the conversations that Kimmy was recommending you to have with your landlord, with your lender, with your bank, have a conversation with any attorney. And I think you'll find that the rates are negotiable, payment plans can be created. So I think the attorneys, you know, there are a lot of really good attorneys who want to help. And so just kind of know that that is negotiable.
Oh, a question came up in the chat about, we didn't cover it really, but we talked about it amongst ourselves, is legal and statutory remedies for people. I know that the federal government, well, we had a moratorium in Hawaii, right? On, well, you know better than me on leases. And I don't know if that was just commercial leases or residential leases, but,
residential.
And so that's coming up, right? At the end of August, you said, Kimmy, I think?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I mean, and there may be other governmental programs. I know the federal government's looking at that closely. I don't know what they can do legally, frankly. You know, I don't know that it's constitutional to say all contracts are not terminable now. I mean, because you got to also worry about the party not receiving the performance. I mean, they're suffering as much as the party's not able to perform. So I don't see the federal government coming up with an overall fix that's really going to be, you know, the panacea for all ills. And, but, you know, that's something to keep a watch on. But I wouldn't count, I mean, I try not to count on government too much. You know, if I were an entrepreneur with a business, I would, you know, watch that, but not count on it, because who knows if it's going to come through or how it's going to be enforced. If there's some specific law that the questioner had in mind, you can post that and then we can follow up on that. But, or some area of, you know, the law that you're watching, like landlord tenant.
Cool. All right. And I think we have time for one more question before we hit 11 o'clock. So another one I got was, what relief is available if my contract is affected by COVID-19? Kimmy, you talked about some of the contract provisions that come up. You know, maybe you can avail yourself to a force majeure clause. Maybe you can, you know, ask for abatement or deferment.
Yeah.
But it really seems like it depends.
It completely depends. And again, like Greg just says, it totally depends on your situation, your contract, your parties. The relief that's available is going to be less to do with the contract itself and more to do with how reasonable is everybody at the table. Because there are going to be some people, there are going to be banks, there's going to be lenders, there's going to be suppliers, there's going to be that are just going to be like, no, you owe us money, which is frankly stupid. And we tell people all the time not to do that. And like Greg said, there's the flip side to that, right? We're like, I need these things because I have to pay somebody else, or I need to take this through somewhere else. So everyone's kind of coming at from a different angle, but your relief is really going to come less from the four corners than it is from get the conversation started, get people involved, and get everybody on the same page and trying to move forward.
Yeah,
Cool. Practical advice.
Yeah, I mean, these legal principles aren't going to rescue you if the other party doesn't agree. So I think working it out is the best thing to do. So yeah, I mean, to get relief, I don't know. I think if that means not performing, then we've been talking about, you know, that today. If it means suing somebody or making a claim, then yeah, we need to know the facts more.
Yeah, good
Cool.
timing.
All right. Well, that's our webinar for today. Thank you so much, Kimmy and Greg, for jumping on and sharing your knowledge and expertise. You guys are awesome. Maylin, I'll turn it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So thank you so much, Kimmy, Greg, and Kat. That was such a great webinar. This also wraps our legal webinar series with the BLC. So I just want to do a special shout out to Catherine and Greg for just your continued support for Hawaii small businesses. We really, really appreciate it. So like Kat said, we will be sending you guys an email, a follow-up email, which will include a link to the recording, a survey, and then I'll also include the attorney's information if you guys want to follow up with them with any questions. And kind of like we mentioned earlier, we here at MCBL, we offer free legal counseling in partnership with the BLC. We offer that every second and fourth Wednesday of every month. And then we also offer free to low cost business counseling through our center. So if you would like to schedule an appointment, you can either email me, which I shared in the chat, or you can also email mcbl@ywcaoahu.org. You can give us a call at 808-695-2635. And then if you have any questions about our center or like to find out any more information, feel free to check out our website at mcblhawaii.org. I think that's it for today. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and we will see you guys at our next webinar. Thank you, guys.
Bye, guys.